The baby hadn't kicked in 3 days. Ruth Morgan sat on the steps of St. Elia's with her palms splayed over the swell beneath her ribs, the copper sun scorching the wood beneath her thighs. The bell above her tolled noon, but no one came to open the church doors. She'd waited 6 hours. The old nun who used to sneak her loaves was gone now, maybe dead. Father Klein had seen her from the window. She saw the curtains twitch once. He knew she was out here. He knew she was alone. The child was 8 months along, and her legs swelled with fluid until her boots wouldn't close. There was something wrong with it. She felt it in the coldness of her belly, in the way her back spasmed when she slept on her side. She bled a little yesterday, a dark slick against her thigh that made her want to dig her nails into her belly and scream until she birthed a monster or died trying. But nothing came, just silence. Just the heavy hush of being neither mother nor widow, not officially. There been no priest to sanctify her grief. There been no coffin for the man she'd married in secret. No grave marker, not even a name scrawled into the red canyon dirt where he'd been shot and left for the buzzards. No one believed her when she said they were wed. The church called it fornication. The town called her a whore. No matter how she screamed, no matter how she bled, they said she brought it on herself, loving a drifter, a man with no kin, no property, no white paper to tie their names. They met in the canyonlands south of town when he was fixing a broken axle and she was running from a man her father promised her to. That was a year ago. She'd been 17 then. Her belly had been flat, her eyes sharper. She hadn't yet learned what it meant to beg. The doors stayed closed. St. Elias stood high on a bluff, the tallest structure in Slatwick, Kansas. Its white steeple cut into the sky like a knife. Ruth had come here every day for 2 weeks, hoping the church might forgive her now that her stomach stretched tight and her ankles cracked under the weight. She offered herself up to their mercy like a sacrificial lamb, hair braided tight, skin scrubbed raw, but all she received was silence. The Lord may be merciful, but his gatekeepers had locked the door. A fly landed on her lip and she swatted it away, furious. Sweat drenched her spine, her eyes blurred. She stood. She should have walked down to the creek where the beggar woman stayed, that one with the milky eye and the rattlesnake charms. But the woman was half mad, and Ruth didn't want herbs or dust. She wanted redemption. She wanted someone to say the child growing inside her wasn't cursed. She walked until she couldn't feel her feet, just the dull slap of soles on dry road. Her eyes stung. Somewhere a hawk screamed. Her breath came shallow, the edge of her vision frayed. That's when she saw him. At first she thought he was a scarecrow leaning against the well post, long shadow cast across the cracked street. A broad-brimmed hat shaded his face. His coat hung like a flayed hide, dark and worn, the color of dried blood. Around his neck a cord of thin bones. Vertebrae maybe, or finger joints, she couldn't tell. But he wasn't a man from Slatwick, that much was clear. His boots were black Mexican leather, steel-toed. His horse, if he had one, was nowhere to be seen. She meant to pass him by. But he turned slow and she felt the weight of his stare. Not cruel, not curious, just patient, like he'd been waiting. And when he spoke, it was with a voice that carried dust in its throat. "You're dying," he said. Ruth stopped walking. "You don't eat," he said. "You don't sleep, and that child's turning in your womb like a caught rabbit." She clenched her jaw. It hasn't moved. His eyes, pale as frost, narrowed. Then it's morning. Something in her cracked. She covered her belly with both arms, as if to shield the baby from the weight of the words. "I don't need a fortune-teller," she muttered. "Good," he said. "I'm not one." He held something out. She almost didn't see it at first, just a flick of motion, a glint of white in the heat haze. A ring, thin, carved bone, whittled with a pattern that made her skin crawl and her throat tighten. She'd seen etchings like that in her mother's Bible before her father burned it, old symbols, older than God. She took a step back. "What is that?" "A promise." "I don't want it." "Doesn't matter," he said. "It's yours." She felt the ground pitch beneath her. Her knees buckled. The heat swelled into her skull and her ears rang like bell metal. The last thing she saw was his hand reaching forward, palm open, the bone ring gleaming like a shard of moon. When she woke, the sky had turned copper. Flies buzzed somewhere close. She was lying beneath a cedar tree, her head pillowed on something soft. A coat, his coat. The ring was in her palm. He was gone. But something had changed. The baby had moved, not a kick but a twist, a long, deliberate curl like a snake rising from sleep. She clutched the ring tight. Its edges bit into her skin, her mouth tasted like metal, and in the wind she thought she heard humming. A low, rasping tune that sounded like a grave being dug slow. Ruth stood, one hand on her belly. She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. It locked in place like it had grown from her own bone. Ruth walked back into town after sundown. The street lamps sputtered against the dark, all fed and moth-crowded. A pair of boys stood outside the barber shop, tossing pebbles at stray dogs. One whistled when he saw her. The other spat. She didn't flinch. Not anymore. Her boots dragged through the dust past the smithy, the shuttered schoolhouse, the undertaker's parlor with its crooked sign. Slatwick was always quiet at night, but this was a different quiet, not sleep but stillness. The kind that settled when something unnatural was near. She could feel it, smell it, a copper tang under the sweat and horses and rot. Her skin prickled like she was walking barefoot across raw stone. Inside her, the child shifted again. It hadn't just woken, it was alert now, aware in a way no infant should be. It moved with purpose, responding to her thoughts like a ghost listening behind a wall. The ring was still on her hand, white against her dirt-caked skin. It no longer felt foreign, it felt like armor. She slept that night in the hayloft behind the feed store. The mice left her alone, the dreams didn't. She dreamed of the canyon again, but not the way she remembered. Not the day her husband was shot, not the blood spray against the red rock or the smell of cordite. This time she saw the canyon dry and skeletal, filled with shadow things and broken altars. She walked barefoot through a graveyard of cattle skulls. Her belly bled black, but she wasn't afraid. Not even when the ground cracked open beneath her. Something waited below. When she woke, her throat was raw from screaming. The next day brought heat like she'd never known. The well ran dry by noon. A baby died in its sleep 3 houses down from the livery, smothered in its crib. The mother walked into the creek and drowned herself by dusk. The town said it was fever. The doctor said it was the devil. Ruth kept to the edges. They watched her now, the women with their scarves pulled tight, the men from under hat brims. Even the children had gone quiet, whispering behind fences. They all saw the ring. Maybe they didn't know what it was, but they felt it. On the 3rd day, Father Klein came out of St. Elia's and nailed a notice to the gate. Those who consort with evil shall be turned away from the light. The unborn are not absolved. He didn't speak her name. He didn't have to. Ruth stood across the street and watched him. She didn't blink. When he looked up, his hammer paused mid-swing. His lips parted like he'd seen a thing inhuman. She waited for him to speak. He turned and fled inside. The child inside her shifted again, not a twist this time, a stretch, long, confident. That night, Ruth went down to the creek. She found the madwoman with the milky eye who was chewing on cattail roots and humming to herself beside a heap of drying skins. Her fire smoked green. Bones hung from cords around her tent, some burred, some not. "You been touched," the woman said without turning. Ruth said nothing. The woman stood slow, like her bones didn't sit right in her skin. She hobbled closer, squinting. She sniffed the air like a coyote. "That ring don't come from here." Ruth's voice came low. "What is it?" "Promise bone," the woman rasped. "Bound to old law, older than the men who wrote your book, older than names." She scratched her scalp, revealing patches of pale, sickly flesh. "A man gave it to you." She nodded. "Then it ain't a gift." The old woman grinned wide, showing teeth black with rot. "It's a tether." "What does it mean?" The woman didn't answer. She picked up a chicken foot from her pouch and threw it into the coals. It snapped with a sound like dry knuckles. Smoke twisted into the shape of a tree, crooked, leafless, burning at the top. The woman hissed. "You should have buried it," she said. "The ring, the child." "I didn't." "Then it's coming, what you called, what he gave you." "I didn't ask for anything," Ruth said, her fists clenched. "You asked to survive," the woman whispered. And Ruth turned and walked away. The sickness came with the wind. One by one, the fields dried. The oxen died foaming at the mouth. Crops withered overnight. Children stopped playing in the dust. Mothers wept behind drawn curtains. The town stopped ringing the church bell. It was as though time paused. And every day, Ruth stood taller. The swelling in her legs receded, her back stopped aching, her skin cleared, her hair thickened. She glowed with something unnatural. When she walked down Main Street, people turned away, not in scorn anymore, but fear. The child kicked stronger now, her stomach bruised from the force of it. She began to hear things, in the night. A voice low and distant, speaking in a tongue she didn't recognize but somehow understood, words like rust and thunder, words that made the dirt shudder. The drifter hadn't returned, but his presence hung in the air like smoke that never cleared. She saw signs of him, a circle of stones in the alley where no child played anymore, a dead rooster with its eyes sewn shut left at the chapel gate. Once, she found a single boot print in the mud beside her sleeping place, too large for any local man, sunk deep like the foot that made it bore more than just flesh. She spoke to no one, and still they whispered her name. They called her the Hollow Bride. They said she'd wed a demon and carried its heir. They said she'd walk into St. Elia's and birth it on the altar. She let them speak. She waited. The dreams sharpened. She no longer saw the canyon. Now she saw the town, saw it burning, saw the steeple split like a rotten tooth, saw Klein's face shriveled in terror as something taller than a man emerged from the chapel doors, holding a babe in arms. Her babe. On the seventh day, the church tried to kill her. They came at dusk, 7 men in cloth and coats and silence, led by Klein. They broke into the feed store loft. She didn't run. They dragged her into the street and tied her to the post where they hung horse thieves. Her belly bulged against the rope. She said nothing. Klein poured oil at her feet. His hands trembled. "May God forgive your soul," he said. But the match wouldn't light. Not once, not twice. He struck it 10 times before he started to scream. Because the wind had stopped, entirely, not a leaf stirred, not a breath of air moved. And in that perfect silence, Ruth began to laugh, not loud, not mad, just steady. The rope burned away on its own, as if sliced by unseen blades. She stepped forward. Klein backed away, tripping over his robe, falling into the dirt. And the sky turned red. That night rain fell for the first time in a month, but it was thick and foul, smelling of iron. And in the floodwaters, the rats came up from beneath the earth, hundreds, thousands, and not one touched Ruth. She walked barefoot through the streets, the ring gleaming on her finger, her belly stretched taut beneath her dress like a drum skin ready to split. The child was almost here. The town would not survive its birth. The labor came with no warning. Ruth was standing in the riverbed when it hit, an ache that started in her spine and snapped forward like a whip through her gut. The pain made her stagger. She gripped a cottonwood trunk slick with rain and leaned her forehead against the bark. The wind had gone quiet again. No birds, no insects. Even the water held its breath. She sank to her knees, teeth clenched. Another contraction took her, this one worse. Her nails tore into the soil and something low and guttural slipped from her throat. The pain wasn't natural. It didn't build and crest like she'd heard it should. It came all at once, thick and sharp and cold. The child inside her turned again, but now it wasn't just motion. It was choice. It was trying to align, to come out. A memory rose in her like bile, what the creek witch had said. You should have buried it. But she hadn't. She'd kept it, grown it, let it feed on her sorrow, her shame, her silence, let it root deep in the bone. She pushed herself upright, staggering through the dark until she found the old stone shed behind the tannery. It stank of piss and hides and rot, but it was dry. She barred the door behind her and sank to the straw-covered floor. The fire in her hips spread. She screamed. It took 13 hours. There was no midwife, no candle, no prayer. Her hands bruised black from gripping the walls. Blood slicked her thighs and pooled in her boots. The pain broke her in pieces, scattered her mind until all she could see were faces, her father's, the man she'd fled, the priests blurring and warping like ink in water. But through it all, she felt the ring on her finger, cold and firm and humming against her pulse. And she felt the child, pushing, bearing down. She didn't know if it was night or day when the baby finally tore free. There was no cry. Just a silence so complete it roared. She lay back, shaking, unable to move, her hands wet with blood and afterbirth. The child lay between her legs, slick and still, its skin pale as ash. She couldn't bring herself to look. Her breath came in gasps, her chest rattled. The sky outside flashed once, then again, heat lightning over a dead plane. And then it moved. Just the fingers, tiny, long, they curled slowly like roots feeling for soil. She turned her head. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a devil. It was a child. Her child. But its eyes, they opened too soon, wide and pale and aware, not like a baby's, not like anything human, the same frost-colored eyes as the drifter, the same calm weight. She reached out, hesitating. The baby didn't cry, it only looked at her. Then slowly it placed its small hand over the ring on her finger. And she felt everything. Time buckled, her vision splintered. She saw the canyon again, but before it was carved. She saw men crawling from caves, carving altars from the bones of the animals they couldn't eat. She saw the first fire lit by breath alone. She saw women carrying stillborns wrapped in black moss and laying them in rivers that whispered back. She saw the drifter, standing at the mouth of a cave with something writhing at his feet. Then it snapped shut. She lay there weeping, not from pain, not even from joy, from knowing, from remembering. She named the child Elia. Not after St. Elias, but after the wind that came before the world knew language. The town didn't know she'd given birth, not at first. They assumed she'd died in the flood, her body lost in the rising water. They told each other that story, Father Klein preached it from the altar, that the witch girl had been claimed by God's wrath, that the curse had lifted now. But the fields stayed dead. The animals miscarried. The sky wept iron. And 2 weeks later, a man found her walking the perimeter of the graveyard with the child in her arms. Her hair was longer, her skin paler. The ring had fused to her flesh now, half bone, half blood. The child didn't cry, it never did, but it stared into the world like it knew the shape of every grave beneath their feet. The man who saw her fell to his knees and prayed. Ruth said nothing, she kept walking. More saw her after that, at the river's edge, in the hills, always barefoot, always watching. She never stepped into town again. But things began to happen. 3 men who dragged her from the loft were found with their throats torn open, tongues nailed to fence posts. The baker's wife miscarried and claimed she saw Ruth standing at her bedside, whispering in an unknown tongue. A boy disappeared into the canyon, returned 4 days later blind but speaking perfect Greek. Father Klein burned himself alive inside the chapel, chanting a litany no one could translate. His ashes stained the altar black. St. Elias never reopened. And through it all, Ruth raised her child alone, teaching him words no one else knew. Feeding him things no other infant could eat, blood of crows, marrow of serpents, a bowl filled with white pebbles that melted like sugar in his hands. One night the drifter returned. She felt him before she saw him. He stood at the tree line, the same wide-brimmed hat, the same coat that moved like it had bones of its own. She stepped out to meet him, the child asleep against her breast. He didn't speak. Neither did she. They only stared at each other, and in the hush between them was every unspoken truth. He looked older now, or maybe just heavier. Like time weighed more for him than it did for other men. After a long silence, he reached into his coat and drew out something wrapped in deerhide. She took it. Inside, another ring, larger, wrought from the same pale bone. She met his eyes. You came to collect, she said. He nodded once. I came to see if you'd keep your promise. She looked down at her child, then back at the ring. And if I do. His mouth twisted, then the gate stays closed. Ruth thought of the town, of the barren fields, of the ghosts that crowded her dreams, of the power humming in her child's blood. She saw the old world in fragments behind her eyes. I won't give him to you, she said. The drifter didn't blink. Then the world ends slower, not clean, but it ends. He turned and disappeared into the trees. Ruth held the new ring in her palm. It was heavier, like a key. Snow fell early that year. By mid-October, Slatwick lay buried under a pale shroud, drifts piled against empty buildings, smoke absent from the chimneys. No bells rang, no schoolchildren shouted in the streets. The town was dying, and it knew it, not with fire or flood, but with a slow, quiet erasure, like ink fading from a page. Ruth watched from the hills. She made her home in the burned-out shell of an old signal tower 6 miles from the nearest road, where the wind keened through rusted metal and the snow didn't melt. The land out there was dry but not dead, coated in hoarfrost and thornbush, the kind of place nothing living would choose. But Ruth had long since stepped outside the bounds of what passed for life in Kansas. Elijah was growing fast, too fast. By the time he turned one, he walked without stumbling. Spoke in full sentences, though never more than he had to. His voice came low, with a tone that bent the air around it. Birds died when they got too close. Insects scattered. At night, Ruth watched him from the corner of her eye and saw shadows moving through him, flickers of old shapes, long faces with no mouths, limbs that ended in nothing. But he never hurt her, never even raised his voice. Sometimes he hummed. It was always the same tune, the one she'd heard when the drifter first gave her the ring. The rhythm of bone striking bone, like teeth clicking in a jar. He was beautiful in a way that unsettled. Pale-haired, gray-eyed, his skin so light it barely cast shadow. But in sunlight his silhouette stuttered, as if the world couldn't quite contain him. And sometimes when he slept, the snow outside the tower would rise in perfect circles, spirals, like a slow dance around his breath. The townsfolk began sending letters. Scratched in charcoal, delivered by mute children, tucked under stones at the base of the hill. They begged her to come back, not in fear this time, but desperation. The crops would not grow, the water tasted of iron. 2 women had given birth to still children with teeth already formed, and none would touch them. One note simply read, "Please, the well is screaming." She never answered. The second ring remained hidden beneath the floorboards, wrapped in deerhide. She never touched it, but she dreamed of it. Dreamed of keys turning, of doors opening inward, of stairwells spiraling not down but under, and of her child standing on the threshold, waiting. In January, the preacher came. Not Klein, he was ash and bone. This one was new, young, Eastern, clean-shaven with polished boots and a voice like spring water. Said he'd come to cleanse what was left. Said he'd heard stories of a prophet in the wild, a woman who bore the devil's child and lived among the crows. He climbed the hill in daylight, holding a book and a silver cross and nothing else. The wind cut at his coat, snow caught in his lashes. Still, he walked without falter. Ruth met him at the door. He didn't blink. He bowed. "Miss Morgan," he said, "I've come for your son." Her mouth curled, slow. "You came to take him." "No," he said, "to test him." She stepped aside. Elijah was sitting cross-legged near the hearth, carving symbols into the stone with his fingernail. They hissed as they bled smoke. He looked up as the preacher entered, smiled, soft and curious. "Hello," he said. The preacher knelt beside him, set down his book. Ruth watched. She didn't move. Her fingers twitched, ready. The preacher opened the book and began to read. Psalms, then Revelations, then deeper things, scripture she didn't recognize, old Latin, maybe older. Her ears rang, her nose bled. Elijah only listened. Then he reached out and touched the book. The pages curled black, not burned, aged, as if 1,000 years passed through the paper all at once. Words bled off the page and ran like oil down the preacher's hands. The young man gasped. He dropped the book, clutched his throat. Ruth stepped forward, but Elijah held out his hand. "No," he said, "he's seeing now." And the preacher's eyes rolled back in his head. He whispered something over and over, a name maybe, or a place. His body convulsed once, then stilled. Smoke trickled from his mouth. Elijah stood, walked to Ruth, took her hand. "He saw the gate," he said. "Will he die?" "No, but he won't speak again." They buried the book under the snow. That night Elijah asked about the second ring. Ruth told him the truth. "It's a key," she said. To where? Where he came from. Elia stared into the fire. Do I have to go? She didn't answer, couldn't. Instead, she held him close and watched the snow fall through the cracks in the roof. The next morning, the wind was warm. Birdsong returned. The creek began to flow again. Slatwick saw it first. Crops sprouted from frostbitten soil. A cow gave birth to healthy twins. The sun lingered longer in the sky. But with the thaw came others. Strangers. They wore gray coats and brass buttons and called themselves witnesses. They carried old maps and iron rods and asked strange questions in quiet voices. They spoke of ley lines, of relics, of bone rings. One of them came to the base of the hill, but he never returned. Ruth found his rod the next morning, driven through his own jaw into the earth. Elia didn't speak of it. But that night Ruth noticed his eyes had darkened, not just in color but in shape, like the iris was deepening, becoming something else, a mirror or a tunnel. And when she touched his shoulder, he flinched. Not from pain, from awareness. He was changing. Not by force, not by curse. By design. The bone ring had begun to hum again. And in her dreams, the gate no longer waited. It knocked. The knock came again the next night. Not on the door. From beneath. A sound that echoed up through the frost-split floorboards of the old signal tower, deep and rhythmic, like a fist of stone beating on the ribs of the earth. Ruth woke with her breath caught in her throat, a cry half-formed and stuck there. Elia was already sitting up, awake, eyes open and black. He didn't look at her. He was listening. Outside, the snow had stopped. The wind had died. Not a single tree creaked. It was the silence of breath held, of a question waiting to be answered. Ruth rose slowly. The second ring, the one she'd hidden all this time, was no longer beneath the floor. It lay atop the hearth, clean and gleaming, deer-hide gone, as though it had surfaced on its own, dragged up by whatever lived under the tower's foundation. She touched it, it pulsed, slow and steady, in sync with the knocking. Behind her, Elia whispered, "It's time." She turned to him, her throat felt scraped raw, to open it. "No," he said, "to choose." He stood barefoot, skin untouched by the cold, taller now. He hadn't stopped growing, his limbs too long, his shoulders sharper than a boy's. The snow around the tower had melted in a perfect circle, revealing black grass and the bones of small animals that had gathered there. The air stank of rust and wet stone. Ruth held the ring in her hand. She remembered the first one, the promise ring, white and thin, given to her when she was still begging outside the church. This one was thicker, etched with markings not carved by human hands. She couldn't read them. She didn't need to. They were older than reading. Elia stepped toward her. His face was calm, not pleading, not cold. "Just certain. If I open it," he said, "I don't come back." She knew that, felt it in the marrow of her bones, in the way the earth below them flexed and shuddered like a beast rolling in its sleep. "And if you do," she asked, "then I stay. Here." He nodded. "With me." His eyes softened. Yes. Ruth's hand closed over the ring. Her heart was pounding. She hadn't felt fear in years, not like this, not sharp and human. She could keep him her child, her boy. She could bury the ring again. Let the world rot in its own slow undoing. Walk into town, gather what was left of the frightened folk, teach them how to plant, how to burn sage, how to survive what came after collapse. She could forge a life from the scraps. She'd done it before. But she would be caging something that was never meant to be kept. He was not just her son. He was a threshold. A door with blood behind it. He stepped forward and touched her face. "You loved me before you knew what I was," he said. "You can still love me when I'm gone." Her tears came then, hot and quiet. He knelt and kissed her hand. Then he took the second ring and placed it on his own finger. The tower groaned. The ground split. The hearth cracked and fell inward, stone by stone, revealing a stairwell that spiraled into lightless depth. From it came a wind that reeked of old paper, salt, and rain on dry ash, and beneath that, voices, low and hungry and joyful. Elijah looked once more at Ruth. She didn't speak. She didn't stop him. She only bowed her head. And he stepped below. When the hole sealed behind him, the wind returned. The snow began to fall again, clean this time, soft as cotton, settling across the tower roof and the grass and Ruth's hair, white as her boy's eyes had been. The world did not end. But it changed. Slatwick came back in pieces. Fields regrew uneven but green. Rain came when it was asked. The church stayed shut and no one opened it again. Instead, they built a shrine at the river, rough stones stacked high, bones worked into the mortar, a cradle at the top. They never spoke his name. But they remembered. Years passed. Ruth lived alone on the hill, gray-haired and thin but still walking strong. She was the last of the old ones. Children came to her door to learn words not in any book. She taught them how to listen when the wind shifted, how to read the shadows that moved the wrong way. She never bore another child. She never took a man. But every year on the first snow, she walked to the circle where the tower once stood, now just a ring of scorched stone, and she waited. She never prayed. She just listened. For footsteps. For a voice. For a knock. And sometimes, when the wind turned strange and the sky rippled dark, she felt it again, the pulse beneath the earth. Still waiting. Still hers.